So the following 5 slides are going to lay out 5 best practices and some examples of what these could look like in practice during your workshops or house meetings. So best practice number 1 is to name power imbalances as they happen. So sometimes it's really hard to acknowledge or recognize power imbalances within a meeting, because oftentimes they're pretty subtle, but then you kind of start, as the meeting goes on, seeing how these power imbalances will show up more strongly. So this is a pretty obvious example, something that you will most likely run into. So the example is 1 or 2 people have been dominating the conversations throughout the meeting. You notice that other people want to speak, but are being interrupted and overpowered by the 2 speakers. It is your job as facilitator to call this power imbalance out. So an example of what this call out can kind of look like is, I noticed that certain people have been taking up a lot of space during this meeting. Remember that everybody here should have equal opportunity to speak. So along with this, it's the facilitator's job to call on other people, make sure that the people who are speaking out take a step back, and kind of reinforcing that everybody should have the equal opportunity to speak and nobody should be speaking more necessarily than other people. Best practice number 2 is to support the leadership of marginalized voices. There are marginalized people that live in our communities and in and outside of the co-op, and oftentimes these voices, like in the broader world, are pushed aside or pushed underneath, particularly white voices. And so it's the job of the facilitator to support and uplift the marginalized voices that need to be heard, especially when talking about certain topics which will come up in your meeting and workshop spaces. So another example of this could be that you are having a discussion on police brutality, but are only calling on white participants. By doing this, you're ignoring the voices of the people most strongly affected by police violence and perpetuating an oppressive system. As facilitator, you must make space for Black, Indigenous, people of color, the lived experts, to talk. So an example here, as facilitator on the left, does anyone have any thoughts on this topic? And then our white participant saying, I do, again, while all of our people of color on the right are saying, we do. So in this situation, it's more important to prioritize the voices of the marginalized communities and kind of weight the stack on this one, or just allowing the people of color to speak first. Best practice number 3 is setting boundaries for yourself as facilitator. I think oftentimes we see this role of facilitation or this role of facilitator as kind of, you know, I have to make sure that everything's going perfectly at every moment of the meeting, and kind of sacrificing your own thoughts and your own limitations. So an example of this would be, if a topic is sensitive or triggering to you as the facilitator, ask if somebody else in the room can facilitate. It is also important to step back and acknowledge your limitations regarding knowledge on certain topics. It's important that as a facilitator, especially if you are not a person of color or don't come from a marginalized community, to not speak for other people, especially people that are not, or especially people that are from those communities. So an example here is if you are a white facilitator, as a white person, I don't think I should be leading this discussion. Would anybody else be interested in facilitating this topic? So this facilitator in this instance is acknowledging that they are white and that this topic or the discussion that is about to happen is something that they maybe perpetuate just by being a white person. And so they don't feel comfortable, and they're acknowledging their limitation and knowledge and allowing somebody who's more of an expert to facilitate the topic. And that's really important, just in general, but especially when talking about issues, a lot of different social justice issues. It's important for people to take a step back and allow others to take the lead. Best practice number 4 is acknowledging your own privileges and biases. We all have our own privileges and biases, a case-by-case basis. Everybody is different, but recognizing these and doing self-introspection is really important if you're the one that's going to be facilitating meetings, because these privileges and biases can have an effect on the way that you facilitate. So, like I just said, it is important to acknowledge when you hold certain privileges and biases. Both might have effects on your facilitation style. You might be more inclined to call on people who share similar views to you while ignoring those that challenge your biases. And that's perpetuating oppressive systems. It is important to let the group know when these might interfere with your ability to facilitate in an equitable way. So in my example here, I have another white person. It's important for me to say that I directly benefit from the systems of oppression that we will be discussing today. As a facilitator, it's important to outwardly say these things so that people can acknowledge that there is a privilege held there, that there is a bias, and it helps other people call you out as a facilitator if those biases and privileges are being very blatant and oppressive. And last but not least, 5, ask the group how you can improve. An example of this is making time to ask the group how your facilitation can be improved. This offers participants a safe space to hold you as a facilitator accountable for any oppressive tactics you used throughout the meeting. By holding facilitators accountable, the group as a whole can ensure systems of oppression are openly addressed. So in this graphic, you have our facilitator on the left, a little bit sweaty. Maybe they were kind of nervous about their facilitation. You have a couple participants, wow, that was incredible. But you have one participant who says, well, maybe these are some things that you could improve on, or these are some things that I noticed that you could work on. And it's important for us, especially as co-opers, to hold each other accountable, because it again is working to build that trust and that community engagement that we all strive for living in these spaces. So the next slide is going to be a couple of discussion questions that I kind of came up with throughout the workshop. These questions can be modified, they can be changed in any way, it can be added to. You don't have to talk about every question. Here's just a couple of questions, and then always feel free to bring your own questions to the table during this segment. I encourage that. So the 3 questions I pose to you all is, as a facilitator, how would you go about calling out a power imbalance? In your eyes, what makes a good or bad facilitator? What are some systems of oppression you see in the facilitation process? And I think those are my 3 questions for y'all. You wanna, I think on this slide, you can take time to pause and address these questions. Take however much time you need. I'm gonna continue on to the next slide, but please feel free to pause on this slide. This is a list of references that I used to make this workshop. The Anti-Oppressive Facilitation for Democratic Process, Making Meetings Awesome for Everyone by Aorta, and The Facilitator's Guide to Equitable Spaces from Results. So thank you all for taking the time to go through this workshop. It's been a pleasure to facilitate. If you have any questions, comments, concerns about the workshop or any of the content within, please feel free to get a hold of your ACC representative. If you do not currently have an ACC representative, consider becoming your House representative. You get to make fun workshops like this. And yeah, so thank you all. My name is Em, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.